Well, welcome back to the 100 Movements podcast. So far in this series, we've been tracing the shift from institutional to movemental Christianity. We've named the crisis, we discovered the Jesus movement, and we've started wrestling with the resistance, both around us and within us. But today, we're going to turn a corner. Because it's not just about what we need to leave behind, it's about the paradigms we need to rebuild. So today, we're going to ask the question, what shifts must happen if we want to move from the church as a Sunday morning event to church as an everyday mission? So the core question we're going to be holding is this: what would it look like if the church lived on every street instead of met in one building? I'm Lindsey Harwood, and I'm joined by Brian Johnson and Rich Robinson, both of whom are helping networks and leaders make this shift on the ground. Rich, Brian, it's great to be with you guys again. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Me too.
Yeah, looking forward to it, Lindsay. Thanks for having us.
So I want to start with asking you guys this question. Why is a paradigm centered on Sunday gatherings so limiting for real disciple making?
You want to go first, Rich?
After you, my friend. Go for
it. Yeah, this was a kind of prepping for this one. This one is one that we get to live into in Kansas City. So for the past 6 years, really a little bit longer with our story, but officially for the past 6 years, we've been exploring this idea of what does it look like to equip everyday people to live as disciple makers in everyday context. And seeing microchurches emerge all over our city. So we have this decentralized network in Kansas City. So just want to kind of set the frame for where I'm coming from for this. But also a little bit of my own context is 20-something years in what we call the predominant model of church. So church as we know it. And in that context, as we explored it here in Kansas City in our own network, we began to ask the questions of like, are we really joining Jesus in what he wants to do? Like, if we consider Matthew 28, Jesus said, "Go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded." Are we really doing that in a paradigm that is centered around a building and a place? And the other passage of Scripture that motivated our conversation was Ephesians chapter 1, verses 22 and 23, where we get like the grounding for the work that we do, which says that God placed all things under the authority of Christ, made him the head over all things for the benefit of the church, comma, which is his body, comma, the fullness of him who fills everything in every way. So like a motivating factor for the work that we're doing as we dream about a movemental form of Christianity in the West is we believe Jesus wants to fill everything in every way. And he told us how to do that. Go make disciples of all peoples, all nations. And so we were beginning here in Kansas City just to explore this idea of like, can we really do that if we are limiting what we do to a weekend expression in a building where there's a group of people that really are kind of holding the power? So Alan kept doing this like triangle thing over our last few episodes. And I think he's talking about like the building, the steeple, the centralized place. And as we just explored the context or the paradigm of church we were in, it was like we're asking people to leave their networks of relationships to come to a place where a few people are kind of, we would say, try not to be too harsh, dispensing religious goods and services. Like there's a paradigm we're living into. And we're not like trying to be harsh toward it and say, that's terrible, burn it to the ground. We're just saying it's limiting when we think about what does Jesus want to do. He wants to fill everything in every way. This is what Paul's telling us. And as we looked at it, we're like, I don't know that we're filling our buildings. So like, if we're not even filling our buildings, we're certainly not filling every context of relationships, every neighborhood, every network, with the good news of Jesus. And when we do that, by the way, when we center Christianity in a building and in a place, we're limiting the imagination for how people could reproduce disciple making in the everyday stuff of life in their relationships, because they're creating an imagination of like, I have to do that, and I don't have the training for it, I don't have the finances for it, I don't have the years of experience, I don't have all of the things. I'm going to stop rambling and give Rich a second to talk, but like that's like what's motivating us here in Kansas City. We look at the paradigm centered on Sunday gatherings and we go, only a few people have been allowed to really participate in the work. And we haven't set the people of God free. We've at best domesticated them. We have this like desire to go, man, how do we empower? I don't want to use the word empower. The Holy Spirit's already empowered all of God's people. How do we equip all of God's people to really go and do the work? So that's kind of my first take on it. I'll pass it to Rich.
Good. Thanks, Brian. And I think I would start with what you were saying of it's the classic don't hear what we're not saying. We're not saying give up Sunday services, burn down the buildings, blow up the buildings, just go fully decentralized and disappear. We need to not give up meeting together. We need the gathered and scattered. What we're saying is if the gathered is the only vehicle or even the primary vehicle for discipleship and disciple making, we're not going to be able to do it. And we're not actually living a Christianity we see in the Gospels, we see in Paul's letters. So it's the both and we're talking about. The challenge is if we just have one mechanism, one vehicle, that's a challenge, one size fits all. But also just the way that I would describe it is if a disciple has 16 hours of waking time. So you sleep 8, you're awake 16. 16 hours over 7 days is 102 hours. So you've got 102 hours at your disposal to be a disciple who makes disciples. If you're in a Sunday service for an hour or 90 minutes, that's 1% of your week. So you're looking at, we're putting X number of money, time, effort, people, all of the stuff into 1% of our people's week. So if you're in a boardroom and a business and you say, we're going to invest 70% of our company's budget and effort in a 1% market, what do you think, shareholders? Most people are going to look at you and go, I think we'll probably find somebody else to make decisions for our company. So the challenge is, it's not that 1% is vital. It's a halftime team talk. It's listening to the word of God. It's connecting in worship. It's prayer. It's fellowship. It's community. But there's the other 98, 99% of the week. So the danger is if we just have one vehicle, Sunday service, or we just put energy and time into the 1%, we're missing it. And then the other and final piece I'd say, Lindsey, is, and we've come back to this a few times in the earlier podcast, as a European, the build it and they will come mechanism doesn't work. So however beautiful the building, good the coffee, wonderful and warm the welcome is, or engaging the worship is, they're not coming. So we have to go and make and go and be amongst rather than just wait for them to come. There is no sort of echo of cultural Christianity and people are looking for church. There are a lot of people that are spiritual in Europe and the UK. There's a growing groundswell in a younger generation that are coming on their faith journey. But actually the way that we embody our life Monday through Saturday as well as Sunday, it's not that we denigrate Sunday or denigrate gathering, but what do we look like in and around our dinner table, the school gates, the coffee house, the boardroom, wherever we are, how are we good news in that context? So the challenge for us is if we just leverage the 1% or the one day or the small number of experts, we're missing the potential to empower, to activate, and to really help in many and beautiful ways the people of God be the people of God Monday through Saturday.
Yeah, I got one follow-up before you ask another question, Lindsey. One of the phrases that we use in Kansas City is we don't just need Jesus' message, we need his methods. And he did not center his ministry in just the synagogue or the temple. Most of the work that we see him doing is in the everyday stuff of life. Like we see the miraculous in the middle of the week. We see people being healed people being fed, people being taught, people being cared for and loved well. In all the time outside of the synagogue and the temple, there's very little that the gospel writers record. So if we have a desire to do it the way Jesus did it, we have to embrace how do we do it the rest of the week. And so we can't center our time, our resources just in that little bit of time.
That's great, Brian and Rich. I really appreciate both of your perspectives being in a completely different context and culture than I am in, because I am still living in a very Sunday-centric culture. And so I'm curious, as we kind of unpack this, if Sunday isn't the center, then what role should church buildings and programs and professionals, particularly thinking like pastoral staff, play? How do we reframe those pieces of what Sunday-centric looks like into a movemental paradigm?
Yeah, it's good, Lindsay. I think what you've got and what we have to recognize is that these things are not good or bad, but when what we're talking about in terms of a building or a structure or a program, when it's an end in itself and it becomes the end, that's when we get into trouble. What they are is a means to the end of Great Commission, Great Commandment, mobilizing disciples who make disciples who make disciples. So their programs are a wonderful way to empower, equip, mobilize disciples to go and live rather than just come and learn on their faith journey with Jesus. A building can be a wonderful hub. It can be a place of support. It can be a place of social action. It can be a place of spiritual formation, place of hospitality. But the end is not get people in the building. We're not just going, what is our attracting capacity? It's what is our sending capacity? So how does this building pull people in at half time and send them out again, rather than bring them in, they sit, they're done, and that's the end goal? So I think a lot of these things, we're not saying they're bad, you should not do them, but it's why you do them, how you do them, and what they produce, which is the important thing. So the role of the pastor is vital. The challenge right now is that the pastor is almost all things to all men. So a pastor in a Western context needs to be a eloquent preacher, a theologian, a people manager, a HR person, a social action advocate, a wonderful strategist, a writer, all the things. And that's impossible and is going to kill most people, and they're going to fail in the social contract. But B, we're losing then the sense of the pastor is an equipper, and how do we release the potential of the saints rather than the one saint right at the center? So again, the pastor has a hugely significant role, but it's not the sole or primary role within a community. There's got to be a communal element. There's got to be the priesthood of all believers and that equipping dynamic. So I think the danger is we sort of overswing. Because it's so swung one side, we just overswing to the other, and we've got to find that middle ground, the both and dynamic, where buildings, structures, programs, pastors are a vital part of the architecture or ecosystem of the ecclesia. But actually, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not an end to get to the building. It's not structures or platforms or programs for the sake of. It's what do they produce, the fruit of them, and they're a means to the end of something rather than they have a life of their own.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to have anything to add to that brilliance. Other than just embodying it here in Kansas City. My buddy Corey always jokes about, there's a few of us that are professional Christians. we still get paid, although we're co-vocational, so we have to figure out other ways, and that's intentional to go. We also have jobs that we do, but we also have space and time that we can commit to being good coaches. And that's one of the things that we often talk about is our role as quote unquote staff people is to take the title of a coach or a director, and rather saying, hey, come join me in what Jesus is doing, we say, what is Jesus asking you to do, and how can we help you do it? So we joke around with that whole Home Depot language for those in America that know you can do it and we can help. And that's what we're here for. Like, we have a space that sometimes you just need to be with other disciple makers who are feeling lonely, feeling tired, feeling discouraged, and you need to be in a room with them to hear their stories. Like, you really need to show up and hear how, this family is like, man, we have breakthrough in our network of relationships, and these people came to Jesus and they were baptized. You need to celebrate that. You need to remember you're not the only one out there struggling along with this commitment to make disciples in the everyday stuff of life. You also need good equipping. You need tools and resources. Like we talk about, a lot of the tools we have eventually become second nature. They become intuitive, but early on they're like a baby learning how to walk with a walker. And like, you need people that have gone before, that have blazed the trail and said, here were things that were helpful. Let me offer these to you. And when we begin to think about our teams in that way and go, most churches in the predominant model, like I'm trying to think of this in as we, do this series of shifting from predominant institutional Christianity to movemental. Most church staff teams have you already have people on staff that are working with families. How do they stop thinking 80 to 90% of my time about the Sunday gathering and more about 80 to 90% of my time creating tools for parents to equip their kids in the everyday stuff of life? You already have a finance team. How do we stop thinking 80 to 90% on the finances of the church budget and 80 to 90% creating tools to help families budget better and create room in their financial resources to throw better parties in their neighborhoods? It's like you have people that are gifted in roles, but instead of thinking I do for the church, we think I do for the church that's out there, and equipping them to do, the work again in the everyday stuff of life.
And that's some great practical applications for what it would look like to just start to frame that paradigm differently. Rich, I'm interested for you to share maybe some examples of what you're seeing globally on what movements are looking like on the ground in everyday context. Brian's shared a little bit about Kansas City, but I'm interested in what you have to share from a more global perspective.
Yeah, so I've talked a bit about my European experience in terms of the UK. We have the privilege of having friends and co-laborers, India, Ethiopia, Kenya, and various different places in Asia and Africa. I think what we're seeing there is this rapid multiplication, it's reproduction across existing social networks. So one of the shifts that I think in a Western versus non-Western context is in a rural Asian or African context, there's a relational network. There's a person of peace that has a household of peace, that has a village of peace. And so there's a really vibrant, that the channel of the gospel can go from one to many quite quickly. Whereas what you see in a urban setting, mega city, be it Africa, Asia, or in Europe, is there's often secularization, burst or broken social networks and challenges. So what we're seeing is this wonderful reproduction in a rural context in Africa and Asia with Discovery Bible Study and these missional endeavors that are really seeding the gospel, and there's multiplication in baptisms and disciples and leaders and households. And then what we're seeing in Europe is actually almost coming out the other side of sort of cultural Christianity, the exile, and just the first fruits in a younger generation where really they are post-Christendom, post-truth, post any fixed point almost. They are coming to a place of desiring something true and real and authentic. And ultimately, they're actually looking to Jesus and the Bible more than the architecture of church. They are coming into a church context, but really what they're looking for is that authentic faith. So it's exciting to see it's not a wonderful strategic push by the British church to be smart and clever and strong. It is a beautiful work that God is doing in a younger generation that is bubbling up, that those of us that are Gen X and older are just seeking to enjoy, steward, give thanks for, get out the way of, and support in any way we can. So there's this real mix of sort of viral growth in Asia and Africa. There's a Holy Spirit bubbling up growth that is hard to explain in the British young people. But then also there are challenges in the urban megacities in a Western context for us to say, we sometimes have to create those relational networks, a microchurch, a missional community, because they don't naturally exist. One person may come to faith, but it's very rare that they have a social network of 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe in particular ethnicity or particular socioeconomic environments they might, but mostly they're not. There's one becomes many quickly. So we have to sometimes create those environments for the gospel to be seeded and then multiply. So I'm seeing this real mix, but the general pattern is there is a disruption in the West that is going on culturally, digitally, environmentally, politically, and that both brings a vulnerability, but it also brings an opportunity. And we shouldn't just lean into the vulnerability. We shouldn't just lean into the opportunity. We have to hold that tension of there is something going on, and every generation thinks they're at the most significant point in history. So I wouldn't say this is the moment and da 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 da, but we have to name that there are in this moment challenges and disruptions and opportunities for us as Christians that are uncomfortable, but are opportunities that God desires to work in and through.
Yeah, and I mean, just to talk a little bit about the cultural moment too, what's happened in the States. I kind of want to take a step back again, just context. The idea for this episode was from Sunday-centric to everyday mission. I think you have to ask motivation, which I think is always important. Like, we talk about the why behind the what. We got to talk what's motivating us. And if we go back to a desire that's like, man, we want to see the church fill everything in every way, we need to structure for it. Like, if our desire is to see Jesus like transform a city, we have to structure for that. We have to think about, are our current paradigms and systems built to do that work? And we also have to think about, like, hey, what happens when there's a global pandemic and you can't rely anymore on the system that was there? And again, I don't want to just go, oh, we're doing it right here in Kansas City. I don't think we have it all figured out. I don't think we have some corner on the market. We're just experimenting with some new ways. But since COVID and since that sort of moment where the church had to go, ooh, what happens when, right? There's been a groundswell of imagination in the States as well. Like the number of different cities that we've worked with, or that the Tampa Underground has worked with, where now there's these little pockets of people going, we want to try something new. What does it look like? How do we do it? And I think we've worked with 30 plus cities in the States. Now, none of them have these amazing movements that are like taking over the world. But it's like a hopeful sort of picture of this is what happens when the church has to once again go, who are we and what are we going to do? And again, there's this imagination of what does it mean to release the people of God to go join him, and what is like in their heart, they're aching for something more. Like they know there's more. They read the pages of Acts and they go, I don't think we look like that. What could be different? So just to say it, there's this like groundswell globally of disciple-making movements. And I think it's beginning here in the West as well. And I think it's important for us to lean into it and not to look at it and go, oh, put it back in the structure and like put it in a box, and because we need to control and be safe, but like let it run wild. As G.K. Chesterton says, let the good things run wild and see what happens.
That's great, Brian. I always appreciate hearing these stories of what's happening in city networks. And, part of your context is a more micro church movement. You have hubs of churches that are meeting in houses in neighborhoods around Kansas City. And so it's just a beautiful, different way to look at how church could gather. So if we try to bring this back to some practical, I would love for each of you just to share one piece of what a leader could do if you happen to have the role of pastor or you're on staff at a church. what's one step that a leader could do? And then what is one step that an everyday, ordinary person could do to take this to the next level? Rich, I'll start with you.
I think in terms of an everyday leader, an everyday person, I would just encourage every person to look around their neighborhood or their network, so their geography, where they are, or their people group, their social network, and just ask what is good news and what is bad news. So where are there places of pain, places of frustration, places of deficit that actually you can not just come with a glib apologetic and an answer, but actually be present with that person or in that place to actually be good news and bring good news. And what is good news? What do people celebrate and gather around? And how can you be part of that connection to build some authentic relationships? So I think it's not just going, how do I give an answer? But it's how am I part of a place where there's pain or there's a place where there's passion, and just actually live in that moment. What does it mean for me to be present as a Christian? So what is then the good news ultimately is the next question. So what is the gospel to these people and this people? So I think it's just beginning to first ask questions. So it's stop, look, listen around, and then just be present, and then learn and live alongside those people. And from that place, a contextual expression of the good news of Jesus will bubble up in the right time. It's a field, not a factory. It's not going to be sort of a mechanistic, by Sunday it's done, or by 3 weeks. It's scattering seed, looking for good soil. And for a pastor, if you're there saying, I want to mobilize my people, a couple of things. One is the mechanisms that you've got already. So if you're preaching every Sunday, what I would do is just finish with a pause. How does this and what you've heard in the last 25 minutes become real tomorrow morning? Or what will you do this week to be able to live this truth out? So when they're gathered, you're encouraging them to think about being scattered. And it might be, I'm going to pause, I'm going to get you to talk to your neighbor or tell somebody what you're going to do. So in the mechanisms you've got, encourage them to think scattered. And then also, I would say if you're a leader, a pastor, do it yourself. You can't tell other people to go where you've not been or you're not going. So what does it look like for you to be a good neighbor rather than just a professional pastor? So what does it look like for you to ask the question of good news, bad news, create some space to coach soccer or be present in the local coffee shop or whatever it be? So I think it's do it yourself and go on your own personal journey. So you're sharing from testimony, encourage people when they're gathered to think about and engage with being scattered. And then the good news, bad news question is one just to start to help people to be present to their neighborhood or network.
So good. I'm hesitant to add anything because I think those are great. But I'll give two different answers. The first one would be, if you're an ordinary person, because that's where Rich started, do spiritual things. So a friend of ours in New York was coaching us once, like early days of our network emerging. And he goes, man, if people know you're a Jesus person, they already expect you to do spiritual things. So just do it. It's actually weird if you don't. And just that like shift in mindset for me was like, oh yeah. If they already know I follow Jesus, they sort of expect me to do spiritual things, and it's weird if I'm not doing it. And that almost sounds elementary, but it was like, yeah, just do spiritual things all the time. Whether it's inviting people to like, hey, can I pray for that? Like just simple invitations. I always say throw better parties. Now I'm giving you another thing, because Jesus threw great parties. But like just do spiritual things and see what emerges from that, what conversations happen. Man, there's like a lot of other things I'd give to ordinary people, but I think just simply just start there. Just do spiritual things as you learn what's good news, right, Rich? For the everyday leader in a context who's going, I want to shift the culture, I want to shift the paradigm. I can't echo Rich's comment enough. Do it first. The second thing I would say is find the weirdos. Just kind of another KC phrase that we have. There are people in your context that are already doing it. they already have an ache. They're often coming up going, hey, we should do this. We should try this. We should go here and serve here. We should, like find those people and ask them simple questions like, how can I help you? How can I accelerate what God is birthing in your heart, what is coming up in you, and set them free to run. And so just flipping that into, instead of going, well, I don't know how we're going to help you, do that here, go, how can we help you do that out there? And so just taking off, those old glasses, putting on some new ones and going, we want to help you run that way. Those feel like the 2 steps I would encourage.
That's great, Brian. I really just appreciate thinking through this understanding of you can't lead people where you haven't been. Whether that's an everyday person or a pastor, you've got to go first and be curious about your context. So these are great practical spaces. We also want to invite you to pass this episode on to someone else. Maybe you have someone else who's having this ache in their heart for something more, and this can spark something. If you haven't already taken the MDNA strengths test, head over to 100movements.com and try to figure out how you're wired for this space. Next time, we're going to explore the shift from professional to people movements and what it means to unleash the whole body of Christ into everyday mission. We'll see you then.